Podcast. Today we have a married couple with us, so you guys can introduce yourself real quick. Give me your age and how long have you been dating? How long was the talking and dating stage? How long have you been married? How old are you? Who are you?
I'm Paz. I am 23.
Hello, I am Brody and I am 24.
So we got Paz 23, Brody 24. How long have you guys dated? The talking and dating stage, how long was it?
We started talking 13 months ago and we're married for 2 months.
Married for 2 months, talking, dated for a year. Today we're gonna do a Q&A with them from the singleness to dating to marriage, whole season. So stay tuned, it's gonna be awesome. We're gonna dive right in and ask, what did you do while you were single or dating in that kind of stage to set you up and prepare you for marriage?
You wanna go first?
You got it, babe.
I think for me, one of the biggest things that I focused on, especially before I had met Brody, was really like figuring out my trauma. Before, whenever I was experiencing my trauma, I didn't have the language to like say that it was trauma, but now that I understand it a little bit more, just figuring out like what was filling my cup, and what I was trying to get out of different like partners and friendships and family members, so that I could feel full, if that makes sense. Because once I figured that nobody or nothing could fill me up, then I went to God. And then when I finally got my relationship right with God, and I like to see like our relationship as intense as marriage, because it's like a commitment, my commitment to God and his commitment to me, like fully. Once I figured that out, then I felt like, okay, like I might be ready to finally like commit to somebody else here on this earth, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So first I figured out why I was feeling so empty, why I was insecure, why I was friends with the wrong people, why I was dating the wrong people. And then when I was, oh, okay, well, I'm far away from God, so let me figure out this whole God situation. And then I was like, okay, I'm ready.
You had to be the one before you met the one. Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh, put that
That's
on a
good
pillow.
There you
If
go.
I wouldn't date myself, then I'm not ready for dating.
Don't make fun of my answer.
All right, what you got, Brody?
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on what Paul said, now obviously the first thing that needs to come first is your relationship with God, but I always tell people, and kind of where my heart was at before we met was, if you're not completely satisfied with who you are and being single for the rest of your life, and that not being your identity, but being content in that season, then I don't think you're ready to be in a relationship, honestly, because if you can't have God fulfill you, then you can't really be the fulfillment for someone else, you know?
Yep, that's good.
That's deep.
2 years, 2 years, 2 months of marriage, and look at that, already spent out some wisdom.
Look.
2 months of marriage.
24 years of...
Well, speaking of 2 months of marriage, here we go, we'll skip down a little bit. What has been the biggest thing you've learned? So you've been married, you talked and dated for a year, married for 2 months. What's been the biggest thing you've learned? Give me like the biggest thing you learned during the dating process, and then marriage. I bet you marriage is a whole different ballpark. That stuff you learned there.
Yeah?
You can go.
Okay. I would say for dating, well, I'm sure as you guys know by my wife's name, we are a biracial couple.
Interracial.
Interracial couple.
Yeah.
So that's actually been awesome to just learn about other culture and just dive into something that was completely unknown to me. But I would say the biggest advice for
No,
marriage?
Biggest thing you
Biggest
learned.
thing you
While
learned.
you were
Oh,
dating.
yes.
While you're
while we're
dating.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perspective probably is a big thing. Perspective, and this is something I actually told her a couple weeks ago. Just because somebody has a preference doesn't mean that it's wrong, right?
Elaborate on that. What does that mean?
Well, it can be as big or as it can be as big or as small as you want it to be. So, for example, my wife and I love to clean the kitchen together, but we have different methods of loading the dishwasher.
Old dishwasher. That'll
Old
test the marriage.
dishwasher. Now, Pause is a specific way of doing it, and
If you guys can't see Paz's face right now, he's turning red. She's getting a little angry.
And
She's getting angry about the dishwasher.
I just throw the dishes in there. I rinse them off, throw them in there, and they get clean. Now that was not how Pause was taught to do the dishwasher.
Okay.
But just because that's her preference doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong. I'm not saying, oh my gosh, you're doing it wrong, just throw it in there. And she doesn't say the same thing about me sometimes.
I'm kidding.
But yeah, I think just growing up in two different cultures and two different backgrounds. One, I mean, just being from New York and then from South Carolina, Charlotte area, just all that meshing together. And I think the biggest theme is just because somebody has a preference doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just another avenue to get to the solution.
Okay. Anything you want to add there, Pause? Anything you learned?
Well, we were dating, and this also, like, I'm still learning it now. It sounds really cheesy, but I think honesty is the best policy.
Put that on a pillow.
I'm literally still, not that I like lie on command, but I hide the truth a lot through like actions, like insecurity actions. But I learned when we were dating that it's easier to like, something that we did early on, like we ripped off the band-aid and we were like completely honest about like everything in our past from the very beginning. And that was something I had never done. So I just had to learn how to be like honest with how I was feeling. Like, hey, like I don't really like when you make that joke. Or hey, like I don't really like when you laugh at something that I'm passionate about. Or hey, like I like flowers here.
Buy me flowers.
You know, so it's like just being honest, which is something
that works, guys. You know, for you married men out there,
anyways,
it works.
So while we were dating, I learned that like honestly is definitely the best way to go. And if like the person is for you, like the person will accept whatever truth you're telling them. And then same thing goes for marriage, and like even specifically for marriage, like the little things, like being honest about the little things, like I don't like eating with the fan on, like even that act of honesty.
And you have to also communicate.
Yeah, so like, yeah,
well,
exactly. So it's like communication and honesty.
Yeah.
But a lot of the times, like women, I'll speak on myself, like instead of being honest and communicating, I'll like have an attitude or like say like comments like, how are you eating like with the fan on? Like
I'm over here like an elephant. Just
you know, instead of being like, hey, I don't like this situation right now, I'm cold, if that makes sense. So
yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah, communication is huge, and I think it's a different level of communication when you're married, because my wife and I share a lovely 730 square foot one bedroom apartment that we absolutely love, and there's no sarcasm. I keep looking at the camera because people are gonna look at this. You
That's
know what I'm
right.
saying?
Hollywood production.
Hollywood. But that's where almost to the point where I think I try to almost over communicate.
Yeah.
Like we'll have code words for things.
So what's the point of over communication?
Like what do you mean?
Give me an example of something that is over communicated.
Okay, like for example, if we had a bad day at work, right? Our code word is.
You don't have to share any details. You don't have to go into
code
details.
But we'll just say, hey, we had a rough day at work. I'm not feeling the best. So if I come home and have an attitude, it's not directed at you. This is just how I'm feeling right now. So one that prepares myself or pause that, hey, they're not upset with me. They just had a bad day at work and this is how they're feeling and this is how you can best help them. Or if they want alone time, whatever it is. But when there's communication, there's honesty. And then there's almost accountability. Because it's like, hey, we said we were going to do this. We said we were going to communicate, and you're not communicating, and that's hurting me because I'm doing my effort. I'm putting my part in. So that's what we ask for each other.
Also, like over communication looks like when you're having a hard conversation, being like, even if you have to say every single time you have a conversation, like, I don't mean this in a bad way. This is coming from love. Like, by the way, like this is how I'm trying to talk to you. Just because like. I feel like I didn't really realize this, like living with a person 24/7, like you start to realize that they don't think the same way as you do, even though like when you're dating and you see like beautiful glimpse of like a connection, like, oh my God, we think the same. Like you really don't, you're like completely different humans. So you have to like just make sure that no matter, like Brody says this all the time, like you have to assume like the other person doesn't know anything that's going on in your head. So you have to over communicate like your preferences, what you're trying to say, what kind of food you want, what kind of music you're in the mood for, how do you like to wash your laundry, like all of that just has to be very like specifically communicated honestly. So it's and here's where the honesty goes in, like only because you're like nervous for marriage or dating and you want to please this person and do things their way. Like you can't lie about that kind of stuff. You can't be like, oh my god, I love medium rare steak, and then like you get to week 7 of your marriage, you're like, I actually hate it.
Yeah, that's like,
you know what I mean?
If you guys are dating anybody and you want to marry that person, you better make sure you're communicating correctly. Because while you're dating, it's easy to put up a front.
Yeah.
Because it won't
Dating,
come
though.
out when you're married.
Right, with dating, you're putting up that front
Yeah.
to impress them for the
Yeah.
first 6 months,
Mhm.
That's
and
it.
then down the road, like, okay, I got him attracted to me, I caught him, so to speak, for the
Yes.
first 6 months,
Yeah.
and then the real you starts to come out in the next 6 months or a year. Now you're married, and you're like, oh crap, this isn't the person I started dating. Yeah.
Yeah.
So don't put up a front with dating. But here we go. So now talking, dating for a year, married for 2 months. Now that with this 2 months of full marriage experience, what would you go back and either tell any single people watching, or tell your single self? Like, hey, I've learned this when I was dating, or now I'm married. What would you go back and tell your single self?
Single, you mean like single dating or single not in a
Single,
relationship?
not in a relationship. Single Pringle.
What would I tell myself?
That there's hope. Don't give up.
It's okay to be single.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I think I would tell young Paz that, like, don't settle for like mediocrity. I say this a lot at where I work, that God is a God of like excellence. So if he is a God of excellence, he made, like, his creation is excellent. Like, you go to a mountain, it's like excellently beautiful. But when he made us with so much excellence and love that, like, he would never put you in a situation or in a relationship where like you wouldn't feel excellent or loved. And I think because I was so focused on filling myself up and like my empty cup for whatever trauma or whatever reason, I settled for a lot of, like, honestly, like, awful things in other people, or even within friendships. It doesn't even have to be, because usually when you're single, you rely on your friends, you know.
Yep.
And so I think just remembering that God is a God of excellence, and he legit has like a person for you, and if he doesn't, he has something excellent for you in store. But like, to never settle for anything less than what like our God is, if that makes sense.
So typically, like, this is a very Christian stereotype. Like, the person who's single, first they have to surrender that singleness.
Yeah.
And then after they surrender that singleness, the next day, boom, they found the one because they surrendered that singleness, so to speak. That's a huge stereotype.
Yeah.
But how did that play out with you guys in your singleness? Was it like, hey, I had to surrender this first, and then, the next day we met each other?
Mm-mm.
Oh, look, prove the stereotype. There we go.
I will say, before I met Paz, some of my closest friends told me that, hey, maybe God just wants you to be single for the rest of your life, and to do the work that Paul writes about in the Bible. Not to say that being married is a burden, because it's completely a blessing. But Paul, for example, was single. Jesus was single.
Yeah.
Right? I'm a very simplistic guy when it comes to the Bible. But in my single, I don't think it's an overnight thing, to be honest. I think some people are geared for marriage, and that's the trajectory that God has them on. Others, it's singleness. And I know it's so easy, because even before I got married, before we were dating or engaged, it's so easy for me to sit here as a married man and say, yeah, just, it's okay to be single, and then you'll get married.
Yeah.
Right? Because honestly, that's not the reality for some
Only
people.
married people will say singleness is a blessing.
Yeah.
Ask a single person if singleness is a blessing.
Yeah. But I think, oh shoot, I forgot what you asked me.
That's okay. That worked.
I have an answer though.
Go for it.
This might also sound like a little cliche, but like the minute that I stopped thinking about it is when I finally understood. Like, I didn't even understand that I was ready. It just happened. Because I think, like, when I was, to be honest, like, I wasn't really ever like single like the people that we're talking about here. I would
just lonely single people with
yeah,
no friends.
but
Me.
Whenever. It's okay, John. I literally am creating profiles for you. Okay, no, just kidding. No, but for me, like, I think I was putting so much like emphasis on, oh, when am I gonna get married? Oh, like my perfect guy. Like, oh, this and this and this and that. And then I think God. I don't think it was me, because sometimes we're like, okay, well, I have to just stop thinking about it. I think God knew I mean, obviously, he put me in places where, and in situations where I would not think about it anymore, if that makes sense. So like when I was entering a season where I, like, looking back now, that was when God was like, okay, you're ready. I was starting a new job, I was being more active in church, I was being more active with my family. So like my brain wasn't there, my brain was in like the things that God wanted me to do for his kingdom. And then that's when it naturally happened. So I think God will take you through those moments where you do think about like marriage and dating a lot, and you do think about the perfect person, and then he will put you in a season where he's like, okay, now you're gonna focus on your passion projects and your youth camps and your this and your that. And then like when you least think about it, like I will
just sprinkle it in.
Add a little bit of
Yeah. And just to piggyback on that, babe, I love using that word.
no.
I think a good thing too, if you really truly do want to get married, is evaluate why you want to get married. And I know for guys and girls it's completely different, right? For example, like girls want to feel an emotional connection, men want to feel a physical connection most of the time. So if that's the reason we're getting married, it's not because God is joining us together. Your marriage is just gonna fail.
That's true.
Because one, there won't be any communication, and two, because of there's no communication, nobody will feel fulfilled in that marriage. So I honestly believe that God brought Paz and I together. I mean, because I'm a handful.
So how did you know when God brought you guys together, when you got through, your brain was filled up with stuff, you couldn't focus on it, and naturally happened when you guys met each other? How did you know that he or she was the one? Like you got through that, you were busy, Pause, your brain couldn't even think about the relationship, and God just sprinkled it in. Brody, you surrendered it, then you guys met each other. How did you know, hey, Pause is my girl, Brody's my husband?
Literal peace, like no joke. Like you can't even explain it.
Peace in what way? Like I'm not anxious about the relationship and
it's like in every way that you could think of. Like there were no insecurities, there was no anxiety, there was no like, oh, let me pretend to be this person, or oh, like let me not laugh at this joke because it's like you might think it's like, it was just okay. So when you go out, when you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing, and like you're not supposed to be doing it, you have like that hunch, like like I shouldn't be here, like, or maybe I shouldn't go down this dark alley by myself. Like you have this feeling, like your instinct, right? I had that feeling for every single...
That you shouldn't be in a relationship with?
Let me finish. I had that feeling for every single relationship, like dating relationship that I was in prior to Brody.
Okay.
Like it was a very like you would say it's your gut, your instinct, but like for me, like I always say like it's God. Like it was always like a hey, like you should not be in this relationship, and I would ignore it for like my personal reasons, and it would always end badly. But like when I met Brody and we started dating, or like even just talking, it was like an instant like yes, like, proceed, like this is good, and you feel it. And like when I was just thinking about this question, like you can only have that. Then you go like back and you figure out like the steps. You can only have that when you like know God's like feeling. So you can only know God's feeling when you spend time with him, and you can only spend time with him when you like give up your life and you forget about like all this other extra worldly stuff. So like it was literally his peace, and I was like, this feels different. Like why does this feel different? Why do I not feel scared or anxious or worried or all this stuff? And it was because of God's peace. And through every single thing, even like when we would have a hiccup, it was always like, it's okay, like everything was fine. I don't know.
Yes,
right, I know.
No, peace is a huge element of it.
So how do you, because I could look back on all my failed friend zones and stuff like that and claim, oh, it was still peaceful, but I still ended up friend zone. I'm sure a lot of people out there is like, hey, I tried this dating this person, and the process was peaceful. So how can you navigate, hey, this was legit, a peace from God versus, oh, I just wasn't stressed out about it?
So my biggest thing was when I had to have a tough conversation with pause, I never, even though I wasn't necessarily fearing it, I knew that it would be met with love and acceptance. Whether it was something I had to say or how I was feeling in that moment, there was never a time where I was gonna be like, oh man, she's gonna break up with me. Or I maybe was thinking that, but deep down I knew like that wasn't gonna happen. So just like you said, peace is a huge thing.
That's all beautiful. I was thinking, like, while you were speaking, I just kept thinking about your question. Like, what if you even feel peace?
Did that stump you?
It made me like think, but then I was like, I have my answer anyways. Thank you, Jesus.
Well, just to recap, so the question, so Pause was like, hey.
Well, we both said, yeah.
They both said, hey, this was my person because it was just super peaceful about it. You know, got a peace, like the relationship was peaceful, nothing to stress about.
Yeah.
What if I can have that same peace or claim to have that peace while I'm dating this person and I'm not stressed, you know, it's cool, there's peace. How do I navigate those two?
Well, one, there's a difference between not being stressed and feeling peaceful and like God's peace. You figure that out by your own relationship with Him, anyways. But then after the peace, you get to like the logistical stuff, right? So, like for example, let's say like Bernie and I didn't meet at church camp while we were like serving. Mm-hmm. We met like casually, like at a friend's party, and it was like we were vibing, like, oh, this feels cool. Like I can be myself, he can be himself. Like this is cool. Like it's going on for a while. We're texting back and forth. And it gets to a point where it's like, you have to have those conversations. Like, what do you believe in? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Like, what do you like to do? And even though a lot of people say like, oh, opposites attract, opposite this and this and that, like there has to be some kind of like connection some kind of connection with the path that you both are on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, for example, like, honestly, like you could have been like exactly how you are right now, the best, funny and all this stuff, but if you didn't have the work ethic that you do, like because of the way that God made me, we wouldn't have worked out. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because like I took time to get to know myself and know like myself, like in a work environment with friends and all that stuff. Like I know that I like people that work hard, that like are focused, that are creative. And then I found out that you didn't like to do that. Like we weren't going to mesh well, if that makes sense. Yeah. Because then that causes problems on the road. Like if you weren't creative, and then we got moved into our apartment, or like the wedding planning, that would have been awful. Because you would have been like lame, and I would have been upset, and then we would have had a falling out. So I think like after the peace, like the logistics come into play. So like, and then even if the logistics are in place, then like seeing the real side of them is usually where like people either like it or don't, or like end up dating or breaking up, because it's like, okay, you're cool, we're both creative, we both like to work hard, you're a night owl, but I'm a morning person, but it works out. But like, how are you at home? Like, what are your family values?
How do you load the dishwasher?
Yes. Or like, and then like the weird conversations, like, are you saving yourself for marriage? Have you, like, is this something?
Oh, all right, off topic question. How far into y'all's dating relationship did you have the
sex conversation?
The physical boundary conversation?
Right off the bat.
Right out the gate.
Like, hey, first date, we're just gonna talk about it?
Yeah, we talked about it at camp.
At camp?
That's bold move at a youth camp. Screw watching the kids. We're talking about physical.
Sorry, kids. We were watching each other.
We hadn't expressed interest, but we had already had that conversation prior because of our conversations. But like when we were dating, like it was very early on, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean it was like we said. Everything, guys, just comes back to communication and God.
Yep.
And we held each other at that standard.
So dating boundaries, you voice your opinion, saying, hey, speaking of Pause voiced her opinion and convictions towards Brody, and then Brody then voiced his convictions towards Pause, saying, hey, I think we should do this, I'm not comfortable with this, Did everything line up? Like, hey, everybody said their convictions, and you're like, okay, cool, I feel the exact same way about everything, or is there like some compromise or debate or arguing back and forth?
Initial conversation, everything lined up.
Besides the big thing, you can take off the big thing, okay, hey, no sex before marriage, you can take off that.
Yeah.
The 99 other things.
Oh, like, what do you mean?
Yeah, hey, what does kissing look like? No, I don't need detail. I don't want detail. No. But just the actual conversation of saying, hey, I feel convicted about this.
Oh,
so
no.
But you don't.
Yeah.
where's that compromise?
Yeah.
Whatever that this may be, I don't need details.
Okay, yeah. I feel like initially there was always like an easy, like, oh yeah, definitely no to X, Y, and Z, whatever we might be talking about, even outside the big sex conversation. But I think we had to figure that out as like our relationship progressed.
Mm-hmm.
For example, obviously like when you're in a relationship and you're like attracted to the other person, like you have to like you figure that out as you go. But like there were moments where I was like, hey Brody, like we can't be in a parking lot like alone. Like, or we can't.
Don't set yourself up for failure.
Exactly. Yeah. And so like there were times where Brody would be like, okay, like perfectly fine, or like we would have to like have conversations about like certain things as we went along. But in the beginning, but because of like the respect and love that we had for each other, it was never like a debate like, well, I want this or like this is
Yeah, we never pushed each other to for anything. You know, like you said, it all came out of respect and love. But the big thing of that is accountability with each other, because you probably remember it a little bit better than I do.
What?
Let me formulate my thoughts. There are times when, like, if I'm lower and pauses on a high, then she is holding me up, and vice versa.
You talking about spiritually? Spiritually,
physically, emotionally, even to the physical aspect.
Yeah, that
where
is
I am thinking how I shouldn't be thinking, and I'm like, oh, hey, baby. And you're like, no. And then the same thing, vice versa, you know? So it's great to have that accountability with each other.
Did you guys have that accountability within yourself or more of a community of people around you?
It was within ourselves.
It was within ourselves.
We didn't really trust our people around us.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So dating boundaries, just check out our last podcast episode about dating boundaries. Nice plug.
Say it all out the rip, out the gate, first date.
All the awkward conversations and the gray areas we talked about it. Dating boundaries, physical, spiritual, emotional. Go check it out. But last question here. What was the hardest part when you're either single, like single as a Pringle before y'all even started talking, or you can talk about the dating, whatever you want to choose. The hardest part in either dating or when you were single, what was the hardest part?
Yeah, the hardest thing for dating was like once I stepped back, is realizing, oh man, this is the real deal. Like, if like Paz is gonna be my wife, and how can I make this process easy and not difficult? Because I knew that we were gonna be together, and I knew God put her in my life. So I was like, okay, now I have a choice. Do I want to be honest and communicate everything up front? Or do I want to put up a mask? Even though like the solution and the end game is the same, the process to get there is my choice. Whether it can be easy. So the biggest thing for me was just being honest out the gate. We got some snow cones at camp, and I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. This is what I'm looking for. Paz was like, I can be your wife.
So, letting go of my past probably was the hardest thing.
Why was it important to let go of your past?
Because then I would have been playing the comparison game for like the rest of my life.
Like past ex-boyfriends and not comparing the ex-boyfriends to Brody, or
like
just past in general?
Even deeper, like comparing my Brody to like even like my father. If that makes sense. Like what I experienced through my stepdad or my biological dad, and then what I experienced through ex-boyfriends or friendships. Because like obviously like those were the main men in my life, my dad, God, like other exes or whatever, like just holding on to those images which aren't pretty, like they weren't like amazing. So it's not like I was comparing him to something great. I was comparing him to stuff that hurt me and like thinking that he would be the same. And I think I still honestly like struggle with that a lot. But like even when we were dating, not so much now, but like when we were dating, it was a lot. Like I would be like, well back then, and then Brody would be like, you're not living there. You're living here. So it's like, well, what's going on? And I would just like compare him to like, oh, well, like in the past, like I got brokenhearted, and Brody would like call me out, and he would be like, well, why are you like putting me in these boxes, you know? But like that part was.
So now, how did you get out of that bubble? Because I think that's very applicable day to day. Because like the guy will defend himself and say, hey, well, I'm not, your ex, or I'm not your dad, or whatever, and the guy will defend himself to that statement. So how did you, from the female perspective, get out of that? Oh snap, Brody really isn't my ex type of thing. How did you kind of get over that?
honestly, it was just being like really honest with Brody.
Yeah.
Because it got to a point where like when he would do something that reminded me of like some whatever.
Like a trigger?
Oh yeah, like it triggered like a memory from like my past relationship. Like I would automatically, like he would know, because he can like people can read your body language. I would get stiff or mad or whatever for no reason.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't explain why, and then he would be confused, and then I would be even more mad. So like I just had to legit. It was like it was like forced out of me, like honesty.
Yeah.
What you just did reminded me of so and so, and then he would be like, oh, why is that? And then that would make me think of like, why is that?
So that goes back to communicating.
Yeah.
Again, communicating.
But like a lot of people don't do that.
That's right.
Like that's vulnerability to the max. Like
Yeah.
like girls, like we hide that kind of stuff, and we just play the comparison game. So like to say like I'm so like, you know, like you felt about like, well, not even burdened, but I was like embarrassed. Like I don't want to like tell you that you remind me of this and this and that, or like what you're doing.
But you would never be in the relationship. You would never be married if you never communicated that to begin with.
Literally.
Or you would never give him a chance if you kept comparing.
Or
Exactly.
if we did get married, we would be uncovering a lot of dirt.
That would be really bad.
Because we're committed to marriage.
So all the girls out there, if the guy says he's not that guy, then you should probably give him a chance because he really is not your ex.
Well, not only that, but like reevaluate yourself.
Yeah. Reevaluate.
Reevaluate yourself and think like why. And well, it goes back to your other question. Not saying that you're not ready for a relationship, but that just shows that like you need to work a little bit on that kind of stuff. Like I do believe that you can go into a relationship and work on your trauma while you're in a relationship if you communicate properly. But if you can't even communicate like, hey, like I'm still triggered by my past, or I still think about this and this and that, then like you're low-key hurting like the other person, because then the other person's just playing a guessing game, you know? So like if I wouldn't have communicated to Brody like, hey, this is what I'm really going through, I really haven't let go of these things, then he would be confused every time that I'm mad, and he would just have to wait off like till I'm like chill and happy again. And then let's say we get married, and then all of a sudden it's this like explosion of things of like, you know, so it's like in those moments, I guess, like even though you, back to what we were talking about, you may feel peace, everything aligns, but like there's hiccups like that. Those are the moments where God is like, I feel like God nudges you like, hey, like realize what you're doing, like realize that you're not really following what I'm asking you to do, of letting go of the past and like not worrying about things and not being anxious. Like realize these things, that's why you're not feeling so good, and then you can move forward, if that makes sense. So it's like everything like connects to like everything.
Everything goes back to God.
Yeah, and like everything. It's crazy.
Thank you for watching. Hopefully you learned a little bit of something, maybe some advice with marriage, with dating, with singleness. Rewatch it a couple times. Check out our past episode about physical boundaries when you're dating. Just keep it healthy. Appreciate Paz and Brody for coming on, giving us a little 2 months into your marriage, giving us some of that wisdom. So peace, love, and happiness.
Thank you.
We love you.
Bye.